Hey MCB32, this is a supplemental video for the lecture on the female reproductive cycle. I just want to go over the hormone regulation again. So at the top of the screen here, we have the concentrations of LH here and FSH, which are coming from the anterior pituitary. In the middle section, we have the ovarian cycle here. And then we have the hormones that are coming from the ovary, so estrogen and progesterone. And then at the bottom, we have what's going on in the uterus cycle, so the uterine lining here. So first off, let's just start with the beginning of the menstrual cycle. So it's defined by the beginning of menstruation. This is when the uterine lining sheds, as you can see here. And also at this time, the hormone FSH is increasing, and we'll get to why that is later on. Okay, so FSH increases, and when it does that, it's called the follicle stimulating hormone. And so this increase is causing the follicles to start growing. Okay, so one follicle is going to grow all the way to completion each month. And so the follicle stimulating hormone is stimulating that growth. And estrogen levels also increase a bit after that because the follicle is actually secreting estrogen. Okay, so the follicle secretes estrogen. So estrogen levels increase, and at first estrogen is doing negative feedback, as we've learned about before, so it's inhibiting the anterior pituitary, and that's what's causing the FSH levels to decrease. Okay, so kind of at these early stages, estrogen is coming back here and inhibiting LH and FSH. Okay. So FSH levels decrease. In the meantime, because the follicle is growing, it keeps on secreting estrogen. So the levels keep rising and rising and rising. And at some point, it changes to positive feedback. So let's say that maybe this is the threshold here. So once estrogen gets higher than that concentration, then it actually starts stimulating the anterior pituitary. And so we can say here that estrogen is causing the release of FSH and also LH, and LH a little bit more. Okay, so this is positive feedback. So LH levels rise a lot, and LH is telling the follicles to release more estrogen, so this is our classic positive feedback cycle. When you have the high LH concentrations, known as the LH surge, and this is what is causing ovulation. Okay, so the LH surge shown here is what is increasing and causing ovulation. Okay, so the egg is released. In the meantime, the cells that are left behind start to transform into the corpus luteum, and so they stop secreting estrogen for a little bit. Okay, so the follicle stops secreting estrogen, and that's why the levels decrease. Once the corpus luteum forms, then this structure can start secreting progesterone and estrogen, although progesterone in a lot more concentration. Okay, so the corpus luteum forms and progesterone levels start to increase, and estrogen increases a little bit as well. Progesterone and estrogen at this stage are also doing negative feedback, so they're inhibiting the anterior pituitary, so FSH and LH levels decrease. Okay, so they are at a pretty low concentration. Progesterone is pretty high, and progesterone is also causing the endometrium to start secreting. So this is known as the secretory phase of the uterine cycle. And so the uterus is getting ready for implantation if there's fertilization. But if there's no fertilization, then the corpus luteum will just degenerate after about 10 days or so. And as it degenerates, this is what causes the estrogen and progesterone levels to decrease, right? So if the corpus luteum secretes progesterone, estrogen, and now it's degenerating, then this causes progesterone, estrogen levels to decrease. So now progesterone and estrogen levels are low, and they're no longer inhibiting the anterior pituitary, and so therefore, there's less negative feedback. And so the FSH levels and LH levels as well can increase, right? And now this brings us back to day one. So if you look back at day one, you can see that FSH levels are starting to rise again. Okay, so let's also explain what's going on with menstruation. So when the corpus luteum decreases, we said progesterone and estrogen levels decrease. And remember, they were the hormones that were responsible for helping the endometrium to grow. So estrogen was helping the endometrium grow early on. And progesterone was helping the endometrium to secrete. And so when those concentrations of those hormones decrease, then the uterine lining no longer is getting signals to stay intact, and so it is shed. And this leads to menstruation. Right? So this is going to lead to menstruation. All right, and that's the end of the hormone cycle. And so then it just continues back to day one. We're starting again with menstruation. FSH levels are starting to increase again, and then it will tell a new follicle to grow, and that will be the end of one cycle.